Go back to the other one. I think you should wear those.
Which ones?
The red.
The red?
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hi, Brandon Allen. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Jackson?
I'm doing great. It's good to have you on the podcast.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I've never seen you outside the walls of the OG Olive Garden.
This is true. This has been a long time coming, actually.
Yeah,
we've been meaning to do this.
I didn't know if you were like one of those figments of my imagination, or like a ghost of the Olive Garden.
Oh, I
like
feel
that
way.
Like you were confined to the walls.
I mean, I'm barely there, so I might as well be a ghost.
Right. One of the things that struck me the way that we ever started talking in any kind of serious capacity was I obviously became obsessed with Jordan Peterson for a while, and I don't remember what was happening. If it's not clear, we were waiting tables at the same restaurant, but
right.
I think it was like getting salad ready or something back there, and I just heard you talking to someone else, and you were saying something like, yeah, he's kind of obsessed with hierarchies, but he seems to have some good ideas. And I was like, are you talking about Jordan Peterson? Immediately I jumped to that. And you were like, yeah, what about it? And I was like, I have a lobster tattoo. Look, I'm so into him. No, but I think I'm actually wearing lobster socks right now. Yeah, I am.
Nice.
I didn't even plan that, seriously. And I think it was in that same conversation that you had told me what I thought was fascinating, that you grew up, you were raised as a Mormon.
Yeah.
And then you became a Christian for like a year, right?
Yeah, I'd say roughly a year.
And
about.
Then you became an atheist.
Right. It was kind of like, it wasn't straight from Christianity to atheism. It was more of, I kind of had like a deistic moment, like believing that maybe there is a governing force in the universe, but it's not a personal force. Mm-hmm. Perhaps it started off the universe.
Well, that's a hard thing to let go of. Like if you're raised being told all that you know is this idea that there was some God that created everything. So it's almost hard.
Yeah.
Like it's almost like your brain as it grew was built kind of around. It's like building a building around a giant piano that can't fit through the door. It's hard to get that idea out once you've created a structure around it.
Yeah.
So what, I guess, what was the first kind of
like
stepping stone? Yeah. What was the first? I can't come up with the right analogy, but what was the first thing that led you to
like question it?
Question? Yeah. Because Mormonism specifically, because wouldn't Mormons consider themselves Christians in a way?
Yes, they do. Right, but Christians would disagree with that.
Right. But obviously there is some kind of distinction. So if someone asked you what you were when you were a Mormon, would you have said Christian or would you have said Mormon?
I would have said Mormon.
Okay. And so what is the difference like in a Mormon's mind?
So there's a few differences. One is, and it's kind of similar with some of Christianity, because some of Christianity is works-based. Mm-hmm. As in, you can be saved through your works and faith as well. Mm-hmm. But I would say probably the majority of Christianity goes with the Ephesians, I believe it's 8. I don't remember.
The grace through faith?
Grace through faith alone, and not of works. And so that's one distinctive factor about Mormonism. They really rely heavily on the works. Mm-hmm. And also, they believe that Jesus is Satan's brother, as we all are as well. Oh, okay. So what the Christian would say is, oh, you're worshiping a different Christ. That's not the true Christ. So,
I'm confused. Mormons think that Jesus is Satan's brother, as we all are.
Right.
Explain that a little bit.
Let's see. So Mormons believe in the pre-existence. So before we came to Earth, we all existed in heaven. And there was actually a war in heaven that occurred.
Were we conscious? Were we like doing something?
That part's not too clear in the theology.
Like maybe we were like in pods, like in the Matrix, something like that?
I don't know. I think we were souls. I think that's kind of the impression I got, although, like I said, the theology isn't too well defined there. Mm-hmm. But we were there, and basically Adam and Eve were down on the earth already, I believe. I might be getting this wrong, but it's been a while since I've studied Mormon doctrine or anything. But basically, two plans were presented. One was the plan of Christ, who, he was going to sacrifice himself for the sins of the world. And Satan's plan was to just basically allow us to have no free will whatsoever, and everybody would be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
Like they both presented these to God.
They both presented
and he
these...
picked Jesus's, I guess.
Yes.
Okay.
And a third of the host of heaven, however, went with Satan's plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were cast out as demons that supposedly now dwell here on the earth to do his bidding. And the other 2/3 are us, everybody else that's here experiencing the world. As far as Satan being Jesus' brother, I'm not sure if that's really like a written thing in like the theology of Mormonism, but it is like mainstream belief. So
I know that, well, I mean, I don't really know much about Mormonism in general, just kind of what I've heard, and certainly I've heard many caricatures of it. But so is it true that Mormons believe if they live a proper life, that instead of going to heaven, that you would then become a deity of your own planet?
Exactly. Yeah, you become a god of your own planet.
Do they think that's what our God is, that he lived a previous life correctly?
Yes, exactly. That's
Okay.
Yeah, it's very... And that's another place where, like, Christianity...
Do they think it's in our universe? Like, supposedly, if we had the tools, that we could go find these other planets?
That I'm not sure of.
Okay.
That I'm not sure of. But that is one of the things that Christianity will point to and be like, yeah, y'all aren't Christian.
Right.
But, the Mormons would just say, we believe in Christ, we believe he's our savior, therefore we're Christian, but yet so many of these huge parts of the doctrine are just vastly different.
And were you... I guess you were raised as a fundamentalist, right?
Pretty much.
Like pretty
I mean,
conservative in
there
the beliefs.
is pretty conservative, I would say. Yeah.
And at what point did you take any liberties out of it?
In terms of like straying away from the faith?
Yeah,
so-
at what point
so
were
to
you like,
speak, or-
well, what... I mean, because I know for me, when I walked away from Christianity, the first thing for me was... or at least one of the first things for me, was I had always kind of heard this idea that the story of Adam and Eve was a metaphor. And to me, that makes perfect sense. I heard that when I was pretty young, and I didn't think that was really important. I thought, yeah, the world probably began in some sort of way like that, but that's a very simple story for us to understand it.
Right,
And we don't
for
really
sure.
need to know exactly how the world began. And then I was arguing with somebody about this very thing, and they got really uncomfortable, and they were like, no, it had to happen or it means nothing. And I was like, well, do you know what a metaphor is? Like a lot of metaphors are like, Jesus spoke in parables. These stories weren't real or nonfiction, but they still had truth to them. They still meant something. And so then they said, well, that's like saying that the resurrection of Jesus, if it didn't actually happen, that it could still mean something. And that was like me going,
It actually could.
yeah, I feel like maybe it could. And that was
Yeah.
like when the ball started rolling for me. So
I see.
what was it for you? What kind of liberty did you take that you were like, that doesn't really make sense to me?
Well, I will add before I answer that there were times when, because I know a lot of people maybe that would be listening would, possibly think, oh, maybe he was never like a true believer or anything. I know a lot of people like to throw that out there. But there were times when, I was more active than the rest of my family was in the Mormon church. So, I really did believe everything. And I guess the first moment of doubt for me was actually due to a girl that I dated in college. And basically, so she was Christian, and like one of the things that she brought up before we started dating is that she was concerned about me being Mormon, and she was concerned about that working out in terms of our relationship. And one of the things she said to me was, well, don't you think you're gonna like get your own planet one day and all this stuff?
Because she was a Christian.
She's a Christian, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And so she just kind of planted some seeds of doubt. And from that, what I did from there is basically just start doing a bunch of research. I started watching a lot of YouTube videos of actually just Mormon Christian debates because I wasn't at the point where I'm like, okay, there's no God. I didn't jump to that immediately, of course. But I was like, maybe there is something weird with this Mormonism
I'd be
thing.
pretty fascinated by someone who did make the jump from God to no God, because that's a pretty big leap to immediately go to.
Yeah, for sure. And so I started just watching like Christian apologetics and also researching like church history, the fact that like Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon faith, was just a con artist who, he had, I don't know how many wives, probably about 13 or so, and some of them were super young, like 15 or 12 years old. Really crazy stuff.
Well, did that throw you off that much, though? Because isn't like the whole thing of Mormonism is that that's not really a moral issue, right? To have multiple wives?
Well, it depends, because Mormonism is split off into separate, I guess you could say, denominations.
Or, different like sects of
Different
Mormonism.
sects. That's a better way to put it. So the Mormonism I was raised with is not, it doesn't endorse the polygamy. And so, but there are those, I think it was the RLDS or FLDS. I couldn't tell you exactly what they are, but they do still practice the polygamy and everything. So, and they actually branched out from Brigham Young, who was the second prophet of the faith. Because he had ideas of continuing that, and so that's where that all came from. But in terms of, where I started researching, it was really Christian apologetics, and there were several pastors I started listening to, and they pointed out different things within the Mormon faith that contradict the Bible, like the whole Ephesians, saved through grace versus saved through works, that kind of stuff. And what I realize now, looking back on that, is that it was, the arguments that they presented, even though they weren't really the best arguments, and also the evidence that I had found from like researching the Mormon faith, that I was like, this just can't be true. Like, one of the biggest pieces of evidence was Joseph Smith claimed to translate the Book of Mormon from golden plates that were written. The language that he claimed to be translating it from is called Reformed Egyptian.
Right, and we found out later that
Reformed
he totally did it wrong, right?
Well, Reformed Egyptian doesn't exist.
Oh, it doesn't exist?
It's a language that does not exist.
Well, I thought whatever he was translating that we found out later that we actually could translate, and you look at his translation of it, that it's complete nonsense. But maybe I heard that incorrectly.
Well, the thing is with the golden plates is that they actually got taken up by, I believe, the angel Moroni shortly after he translated it.
Oh, like they don't exist anymore? Well, maybe I'm thinking of something else then.
Well, I think they probably never existed. I think it was all a sham.
Right, but as far as we
yeah.
can have contact with them, they're not
of course.
in our reach.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so there was basically you reading a lot about the actual history of. That's a big thing for me, because another thing with me, like at first the question was, because I always believed that the Bible was 100% accurate and 100% true in every way. And so then when I started wrestling with some stuff, it kind of helped for me to say, oh, well, maybe it's more of a parable and it's not meant to be taken literally.
Yeah.
And then in my head I was like, but it could still be 100% true. It's just a
Just
parable.
in a different
yeah,
way.
it's just not a history book. So maybe all the things I'm having trouble with are just improper interpretations. And I read a few books by this guy named Bart Ehrman.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he's one of the leading biblical scholars, and he actually lost his faith learning about the Bible, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And one of his most famous books is called Misquoting Jesus, and it just talks about how we have the Bible that we have today, how it got from the people who wrote it to our hands. And it's something you don't really think about, because I always thought the Word has been preserved perfectly. Got it. Okay, cool.
Boop, boop, boop.
And I was always told by my parents and like my church leaders and stuff, because the argument we all know is, well, it's been translated a million times, so who are you to say what it means? And the counter argument that I always heard from my parents and church ministers and stuff was, that's not true. Like, the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and we have the original Hebrew, and it's been translated to English. And the New Testament was written in Greek, and we have the original Greek translated into English. Well, that's not true. Like, that's actually completely not true.
Yeah.
And it's actually a pretty good argument for people to be like, it's been translated a million times. Like, that's not necessarily the case, but it's closer to the case than we have the originals. because we have no original copies of any book of the Bible.
Yeah,
And we don't
exactly.
even have the copies. We have the copies of the copies of the copies of the copies.
Yeah,
and
mostly by anonymous authors as well. We don't even know some of
right,
the
a lot of
authors.
them, it's like kind of up for grabs, like who actually wrote it. Like a lot
Yeah.
of the letters that Paul supposedly wrote, there was like a lot of power in writing, writing something and signing it, Paul the Apostle, and sending it to some church, because these churches don't know what Paul's handwriting looks like.
Right.
So they just see something signed by Paul and they were like, oh, this is important. We have to listen to this. So people would have a lot of reason to forge a letter like that. And you think the printing press was only invented like 500 years ago. So before that, people just had to copy it by hand. And it's like, we're pretty literate, like
Yeah, for sure.
as a generation. We're like taught since we're little how to read and write. And even if we went down tonight and tried to copy any books of the New Testament, like it'd be pretty rough, and we'd probably
make a lot of mistakes,
quite a few
yeah.
mistakes. Back then, most people weren't like hardly literate at all, and the literate people were just considered the people who could like understand what the letters looked like and copy them down.
Right.
And so a lot of these people didn't even know words, they just knew the letters. So there were no spaces in these copies. They're just letter after letter after letter. And so sometimes when we translated it, we didn't know exactly where the words cut off.
I find it interesting as well that, why would God inspire these books or, write these books?
If he doesn't care enough to preserve them.
Or if he doesn't care enough to preserve them, and also using languages that later die out. It's like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
Like, it's just-
But I think it's so, yeah, I think that's the biggest deal for me, is like if God cared enough to inspire the words, why don't we have one original copy? Wouldn't that
Yeah.
have been pretty easy? Like, you'd think that it wouldn't take God to do that people would be like, hey, this is an important book, don't lose it.
Yeah.
And so it's funny when people talk about the Bible being the inspired word, it's like, what do you even mean when you're talking about the Bible? Because the Bible, what we've referred to as the Bible, has been plenty of different looking books since it was written to when we have it now.
Yeah.
So if you went to the middle of some random century and got the Bible that they had, it would look significantly different than the one that you have. And there's been stories that have supposedly been taken out and added entirely by people later. And
I mean, even if we did have like
Even
an
if it-
original,
right, even if
it wouldn't justify these outlandish claims. I mean, the whole idea of extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. The feeding of like the loaves and fishes, for example. Like, there's no amount of textual evidence that could ever justify that belief, because
Right.
it defies everything we know about physics.
One thing
know?
I find interesting is they say we have so many copies of the Bible, and they use that as the evidence of all the stuff that happened in the Bible.
Yeah, they're using
And
the
I'm
Bible
like-
to prove the Bible.
I'm like, right, but that's like a few thousand years from now, people finding all of these copies that we had of Harry Potter, and then being like, it had to be true because look how many people cared about the story. That makes it
Exactly,
true.
yeah.
It's like, no, just because something is a powerful story doesn't make it like
Actually
history,
true.
like actual accounted for history.
Right.
But that was a big thing, is that a lot of my faith was based on this book that I didn't really even understand the validity of. And so as soon as I read about that, that's why I would encourage a lot of people of faith to actually learn the history of the doctrine that they're reading. And I don't know that it's going to kill everyone's faith, but if someone can
Yeah.
keep their faith after that, then I would have much greater respect for them than someone who's like, well, I don't really want to rock the boat. Like, I believe it's
Yeah.
the inspired word. I don't want to mess around with that.
Absolutely.
It's like we're talking about the truth right here.
That's
And,
what
like,
matters, yeah.
Supposedly, if you like really care about this God who you think is the truth, then why wouldn't you trust that if you looked, you would find
Yeah.
like nothing but the truth?
One of my like favorite atheists to listen to, Matt Dillahunty, he said that the truth has nothing to fear from investigation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I mean, if you go and investigate and it does turn out to be true, then you have a more justified, rational position
Right.
at that point. So,
Right. So the first thing that I'm trying to run it back to the question.
You're good.
The first thing that got you away from Mormonism was this girlfriend you had asking you about the specifics of it.
Yeah,
you being
just kinda
like, you
challenging
being like,
it a
oh,
bit.
I guess I hadn't really thought about that kind of thing.
yeah, basically. I mean, it was like I had believed the things that she was challenging, like, you're going to get your own planet and everything. But I don't know what it was. Just for some reason, it at that time, it kind of planted a seed of doubt. And it may have also been, I didn't go on a mission as a Mormon, and I felt just
Like on a mission trip, you mean?
Yeah, so the mission, they could just call it a mission. It's kind of like a mission trip, except for, I don't know if you've seen Mormon missionaries riding bikes.
Yeah, the one with the short button-ups.
Yeah. So that whole thing, and that's a 2-year thing.
I've heard the Book of Mormon, the musical, if that means anything. That's all I know.
Actually haven't seen that.
Oh, dude, it's funny. It's pretty funny.
But, so I didn't go on that mission, and that actually might have been the first. I said it was the girlfriend. These things were kind of
guilt about not going on that?
See, I kind of went back and forth.
Did you not want to, or were you busy with something else?
Like, I wanted to, but for the wrong reasons. Like, the only reason I wanted to is because other people expected that of me. And once I realized that, I was like, well, that's not a good reason to do it. Like,
Right.
So I didn't. And I guess once I got into college, I did kind of start going to church less. And it was because I did feel this kind of negative energy towards me not going on a mission from other church members. And so I guess that then led to the girlfriend questioning, and I was already kind of not as active.
Right.
So that all kind of spiraled into me doubting, and then the researching, getting into the arguments and the evidence.
So what, I guess, so I thought of it as more of a question before, but now I have a hypothesis, so tell me if I'm right.
Okay, go for it.
I would guess that the reason you didn't go directly from Mormonism into confusion, into atheism, is because the person who made you doubt was a person of faith, but just a different faith. So I would think that maybe in that situation it might be easier to think like, oh, she was the one who kind of led me to the truth. Maybe she knows what the truth is.
Yeah, that was kind of it. And also, it's just a bigger jump as well to make, going from a specific religion you find to be false to then saying, oh, I'm not convinced that God exists. I mean, that's a pretty big jump.
It was almost just like you letting go of a part of your religion, because Mormonism was just built off of Christianity. So you were just kind of just like skimming off that part that was built on.
That's true. Yeah. I can see that.
So I'm just guessing. I don't know enough about it, but it just feels like maybe you're like, oh, okay, well maybe I am right in this way about it, but I just Mormonism went too far with it in that way.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And so then you stayed a Christian for about a whole year. What was that like, and what eventually made you think, no, this isn't right either?
Well, what was weird about it is that even though I was a Christian and I still believed in God and in Jesus and everything, it never felt the same as Mormonism. Like, because within Mormonism, I would go to church, I'd be singing hymns. I'd go to church probably 4 or 5 times a week, and I would just feel what I would consider to be the Holy Spirit. And I really had trouble finding those feelings that the Holy Spirit gives you of elation and gratitude and all that kind of stuff within Christianity. And so even though I was still a Christian, I still believed intellectually. My heart was confused in a way, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't, it didn't feel right. And so I guess from that, I actually saw a video, and it was of an atheist talking to 2 Mormons. This was when I was a Christian. So, but and I can remember the video specifically. He was just in his car, and he was asking very basic questions, and basically just demanding evidence and argument for what they believe and everything like that. And that video really was kind of the start of me being like, maybe there's something to this whole God thing in general, because I've always had like a very analytical mind and a very evidence-based mind. I just never applied that to my religious beliefs.
Right.
And once I did that, through the course of, that whole year of me being a Christian and still kind of searching, that's when I realized, I don't think I believe this stuff anymore.
I think my theory on that feeling thing is because this is my theory on it, because I had a similar thing when I was younger with the whole, like, I'm feeling the Holy Spirit, and, like, I can feel like I know God exists, because like a lot of people's arguments for Christianity, which I think is a fine argument if you just want to say this is why I'm a Christian, but not why I'm trying to convince you to be a Christian, because it's not a very good convincing argument.
Right.
But a lot of people will say, well, I've just had certain experiences that I cannot pass off as anything other than God. And if you want to believe that and that makes you feel good, that's great. But if you want to like really challenge that, my challenge would be, first of all, the power of suggestion is like incredible. Like there are people that can think themselves into feeling and experiencing symptoms of certain illnesses or diseases that they don't actually have, because the mind has that kind of power over the body. And so even if you were like, I felt a hand touch my hand even though there was nothing there, that's got to be God. It's like, not necessarily. Like, that definitely could have been your mind. Like,
Yeah,
because
how do
I
you
remember being young and being in the church, and people would talk about, I kind of was, at first I was raised Church of Christ, which is very conservative Christian, but then I started going to a more charismatic church where they're, I mean, not quite touching snakes and stuff like that, but they were like healing people and talking about speaking in tongues and stuff like that. And when you go to church camp and everything's so emotional and everyone's having these experiences, it's like the first time I went, I remember everyone feeling this and talking about their stories of like, I could hear God literally talking to me like you talk to me right now. And I remember thinking, man, I want that. Like, my thing wasn't, that doesn't sound real. My thing was, I want that really, really badly. And so I just kept wanting that, and eventually when everyone's around me and they're like, the Holy Spirit, we're inviting him into this room, he's here, I can feel him, your friend can feel him, your other friend can feel him, and you just want to feel it so bad, so at a certain point it's like your brain lets you, and then you do, and you feel it.
Yeah.
And then kind of, I mean, it's proven that like when you remember something, you rewrite the chemical process in your brain every time that you recollect a memory. And sometimes, like, when you're telling a story of awe and you wanted to tell it to people, you want it to seem really cool. And so sometimes maybe people aren't reacting the right way, or you want them to react bigger. And so you stretch something here or there, but it's not a big deal because it's not that much. But even that little, you're slightly rewriting the chemical process, which is the memory in your brain. So then it's put back into the file as more extravagant than it was. So then you don't remember it for a while, and then you recollect it like a few months later, and you take the file out, and it already is kind of more extravagant. And then you take that one and you make it bigger, and it's like slowly you get like 5 years away from this thing, and you were like, no, God was talking to me like you talk to me now. But of course that's not what was going on. And even if you went back to you in time when it actually happened, you might be like, well, no, I didn't think like is someone here? Like I definitely knew that it was not a real voice or whatever.
And memory is notoriously bad. Like,
right.
Our memories are terrible as it is.
No, absolutely.
So.
I mean, people can create memories. My cousin told me they had this picture of Dalmatians in their house that they used to have. And my cousin had this memory of when they came in and like when they first got them and they came into the living room and tore up all the couches and stuff like that. And he said he was like talking to his dad about it one time. And he was like, do you remember how crazy that was? And he was like, you weren't alive then. That was before you were alive. And he was like, what? And the only way he had that memory is because he had just seen that picture and he had heard that story told by his dad. And he just kind of, when he was little, kind of created the memory in his mind and thought that he was there. And it feels really real, so it's hard to convince yourself otherwise. So I understand when people are like, I really feel it. I'm like, right, but that's not enough evidence, certainly not to convince anybody else.
Yeah, and I would also add, like, if a Christian would say, I really am basing this belief on my feelings or personal experiences, it's like, well, then how can you, by that same merit, how can you separate yourself from being a Muslim or...
Yeah, how can you say that their stories aren't just as real as yours? Do you just think that they're lying or they don't understand?
They're basing it on the same foundation.
Right, absolutely, completely.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that in there. But
yeah, no, it's better. Like, that's a better explanation, because I was just saying it doesn't really make any sense, but that's a better kind of application of it, which is that not only does it really not hold up, but it also doesn't give a good justification of your religion over others, because people are convinced that theirs is the one.
Yeah.
But obviously other people are having experience. Like, Christianity is not the only religion that has some kind of spiritual experience.
Yeah, of course.
So let me try to get into some of these questions I wrote down.
Sure.
One of them is, what do you think defines I said you, but like the deep rooted whoever you actually are. And so it's kind of also the question, do you believe in a soul?
Okay. That's pretty deep. That's
Or what that might be.
That's kind of a tough one. Well, I don't believe in the soul.
What would you define as a soul that you don't believe in? Because
I guess it's
I
just-
think that's like how I would define it is just the idea that it's something that you are more than this collection of cells. And so whatever that more is, whatever that looks like, I don't know, but that would be what I think people are referring to
I see.
when they say soul.
I mean, personally, for me, I think I do just believe in the collection of cells, but it's that just saying that reduces it because it kind of it doesn't really point to the experiential side of things. Like, we may just be a collection of cells. There's no evidence to suggest there's anything else to our minds. The brain is probably the mind is probably a product of the brain.
Right.
But at the same time, I lost it. I lost where I was going. Sorry. Man.
Well, I think I've been thinking about it a lot because I kind of dabbled with atheism for a while, but I'm very much a romantic thinker, I guess, and so that's why I fell in love with Jordan Peterson because I don't know if you've heard his biblical series where he doesn't take the Bible really from a religious standpoint. He just takes it as kind of literature and develops the most meaning that he can find in the stories. And I think it's like beautiful meaning that he's able to find, stuff that I had never heard from anybody else before. And so I had gotten stuck listening to like only atheists, which I think a lot of atheists have like a lot of important and interesting information to offer, but I'd gotten stuck listening to only them, and I'd kind of almost like lost this metaphysical romantic part of myself. And I started listening to I used to listen to him more, but I started listening to him again recently. Alan Watts is his name.
Oh yeah, I love Alan Watts.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's a very metaphysical thinker, and like he talks about, the universe and who we truly are and whatever the soul is and stuff like that. And I was trying to think, like, what am I? If am I this collection of cells? But then there's the question, like, if you are exactly that collection of cells, like if I took you in your current form with everything you know and all your memories, and then I just wiped your memories, but your brain was still functioning, but you just had to relearn language and relearn, like you started off as like you'd just come out of the womb, but you are you right now, the same collection of cells, and we had to reteach you how to speak and how to learn and how to be aware of yourself and develop a new ego. Would that still be you, or would that be a new person? I mean, it's a thought experiment, so there's no real right or wrong answer.
I don't know. For me, I think, if you were to wipe the memory, it wouldn't be the same collection of cells, I don't think.
Well, it wouldn't be the same chemicals in the brain because I'd be wiping all of those memories that you had developed.
But you're saying if it was like the same
But
on a
you're the
cellular
same
level.
Yeah, if there was some way for you to stay in this chair like you are right now, like your body's still gone through all of the experiences, and technically your brain has too, you just don't have any memory of it. And you have to develop new memories.
That's a tough one.
Because
I'd have to think on that.
In your mind, I would imagine you'd become mentally a new person, and you would think of yourself. If I told you, like, no, you were Brandon, and you were this cool guy, and I met you this way, and you had no memory of it, and you're like, I don't remember that guy, or like even what he thought about. If we could pull something like that off, that'd be an interesting experiment. But yeah, that gets into a whole longer thought. But that was just kind of my idea of like what actually is you. And you're saying you don't
I think it's
necessarily believe in something beyond just the collection of cells.
Yeah, I think it's really just the biology is what we are in our experience. And what I was trying to say before when I lost my train of thought is it when you say, oh, we're just a collection of cells, that misses the experiential side, which is highly complex.
Right.
Our brain is
It can
highly
sound
complex.
kind of dismissive, but
And I know
get
you're
what
not trying to dismiss
saying.
it, but
Yeah.
some people do. Some people
Right.
do try to, be dismissive of it. And so I guess for me, it's hard to talk about the self as well because I'm kind of I don't believe there really is like a self, like a rider on the horse kind of ego in our minds that's, propagating everything we do. And this comes from, me listening to a lot of Sam Harris
Yeah,
and introspectively.
His free will idea.
Well, well, it kind of is the free will idea, but also his idea of, and many meditation masters present the same idea of the self being an illusion. The self basically being something that is like another perception, just like a sound or any appearance in consciousness. And that really what we are is consciousness itself and its contents and the flow of that and the change of experience. So I guess that's kind of what I would say. And it's not to say like we don't exist. Like physically, obviously we do exist and we have memories and everything, but all of those are just appearances in the space and awareness of consciousness, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there was this thought, what I was actually going into a minute ago, and I said it's pretty metaphysical and I won't get into it. That was kind of along the same lines.
Yeah.
Which is, I speak improperly because I was going to say I feel like I discovered this of myself, but I didn't really discover it because I've read about these things before.
Yeah,
but I
for
think
sure.
I finally understood what I was reading.
Yeah.
And it was when I was listening to Alan Watts, and suddenly I was like, oh, I think right, that the ego, our perception of ourselves that we create, has created this illusion of us being individuals, and that I think whatever the soul is, I don't think we all individually have souls. I think the soul, the who we are, is one thing.
Like collective consciousness.
Right. I
kind
think
of thing.
consciousness
Yeah.
is one entity that the universe was just the birth of consciousness, because it's the thought experiment of, if I took this notebook and I put it in the other room where no one was and no one could see it and came back in here, would it actually be there? And it's well, I don't know, I guess so, but in a way it's not, because there's nothing
There's
to
no
experience
conscious
it
experience.
in any way.
Yeah.
And if there's no such thing as consciousness, does anything really exist? It's it might as well not exist, because if there's nothing experiencing anything, then what is anything in general? You know?
No, I
what would a
definitely-
universe be without anybody to see it or
Yeah.
hear it or experience it?
I'm not sure if I agree with you on the idea of everything being like a collective consciousness, but I do agree with the idea of...
I don't know that I'm talking about a magical thing that we have some kind of access to all the information. I mean, maybe who's to say, but...
yeah, I'm kind of agnostic towards that. I'm not
Right.
really sure.
Right, well, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't know, but I think it makes more sense to me to say, part of it was because I feel like I've been around forever. And I've gotten that from other people, that it's I mean, I guess I can understand the concept that I began, 20 years ago?
Right.
But I don't feel like that. I feel like I've been around. When I read about history, I guess in the back of my mind, I know I wasn't actually there, but this feels because it's human history, it feels like my history. I have some kind of relation to it. A different relation than I would to, say, Star Wars or some kind of sci-fi thing that's not grounded in reality.
Right.
So part of that, my theory behind that, my just thought experiment was, and of course I didn't come up with this, I think I just kind of understood it, which was that life itself, the reason life is developed, is because it was just consciousness itself growing. And so Alan Watts described there's basic consciousness, which was rocks, which supposedly we might have come from rocks that turned into spores at the bottom of the ocean that then became fish and grew legs and whatever. And he said you can still test out that very basic form of consciousness, which is I take a glass and I tap it, and that's a response. I'm getting a response from this. It's a small thing. It's a very primal, basic thing. But even this cup, when I tap it, I get a response, and you can hear that. And that's consciousness on the most basic level. But it's just evolved over millions and billions of years to then create animals, to then come to what we are now, which is humans. Because it doesn't appear that animals really have ego, because you find the thing a lot when you get a big dog that thinks he's a little puppy because he doesn't have a proper perception of himself or any perception of himself. And so I think when humanity developed ego, maybe it can be rendered as a useful tool, but I think it's given us this illusion. I think it's given us this illusion that we're all individuals. And the problem that it can create is if you imagined my whole body was all of consciousness, and then every part of my body developed an ego. So then suddenly my stomach and my hand and my arm have different egos from each other. And my stomach needs food so the collective can survive. And he's like, hey, hand, I need you to grab me some food. And the hand's like, that's not my problem. But it's like, you can understand in that analogy, it's like, well, that's not going to work out very well. It's like, right. But these different parts of my body have these illusions that they're fending for themselves because they're individuals. And so I think if you look at humanity as a collective, like whether it's true or not, it's more helpful. And I mean,
Might be more helpful, yeah.
we have like rituals and kind of practices that I think help enhance this idea, like marriage, when the two become one, and then you have a family, and then you're suddenly responsible for more than just your person, and you start to understand that, like, oh, I'm fighting for the collective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenging things about consciousness as well,
Mm-hmm.
because we're all locked inside of our own heads.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's no way for me to even know what your experience of the world is like at all. Like, we
Mhm.
could both look at the color red. Like, we could both look at, well, this is kind of more of an orange, but we could both look
Right.
at this.
You can't even get that one right.
Yeah, I know. We could both look at it and be like, well, we've both learned to call this orange, but how do we know that my orange is like the same
Yeah,
as
if it has
your
the same
orange?
shade. Well, and I think it's a really good argument. I thought it was a dumb argument for a long time, but I think it's a really good argument when you realize that colors aren't really real. Like, it's
Exactly.
just the way that light bounces and reflects into
It's
our
created
eyes
in the
and how
mind.
we perceive it. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's really interesting. Everything is either black or white, in a true sense. But I'll move on to
Yeah, go for it.
the very basic, much asked question of atheists, which I feel like I have an understanding of, but I know a lot of people don't. And from someone who has, I mean, I said I've dabbled in atheism, but I wouldn't call myself one, just because I don't know. I'm probably because I'm just too romantic and metaphysical thinking that I'm like, I gotta leave something open. But where do you stand as far as morality and virtues? Because the argument is always, which I don't agree with, but the argument is always the only way to have any kind of objective morality is if there is a God dictating
Objective
it.
lawgiver, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would probably align myself more along the lines of what Sam Harris would say, is that there's a continuum of peaks and valleys of well-being that we can experience.
Mhm.
And once we agree that the worst possible misery for everyone is bad, if anything's bad, then that's bad. If every conscious system suffered for as long as it could, as much as it could, like, that's the worst possible misery for everybody.
Right.
So if anything's bad, that's bad. And once you admit that, you realize that there is kind of a spectrum, or as I was saying, how to say it? There is kind of these different shades of how we can navigate the world. There's
Right.
different points of well-being. And
So there are gray areas.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah.
I would say so, for sure. Because I think, one example of that would be like lying.
Right.
Like, generally,
like a white lie.
yeah, I would say generally, like, lying is, immoral. I think because anytime you lie to somebody, you're basically saying you can't be reasoned with. Like, you can't handle the truth. I know that sounds weird, but it's like, I can't tell you the truth because then, you're not a reasonable enough person to be able to handle that.
My thoughts on it are, I think there are certain things that we've thought are in the morality spectrum that I don't know always are. And so I think if lying leads to, I don't think there's any such thing as objective morality. So I think the idea of arguing for objective anything is silly. Because they're like, there's no objective morality without an objective God. And I'm like, how do you objectively know that God exists?
Yeah.
Because everything that you say is objective about your proof of God is based off of your subjective interpretation of whatever you think God has revealed himself to you as. So I think, it's an uncomfortable idea to think that morality is subjective, but I think it's not that subjective. I think it's evolved along with us, just like all
I
of
would
our
say
other
so.
traits
Absolutely.
have.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's like we kind of play with something else and we're able to, like, eat the meat and spit out the bones. Like, it's that easy. And I mean, it's not that easy, but it's like that the analogy is that easy.
Yeah.
It's like, we had slavery for a long time, and it seems, I mean, as far as it seems in the history books, that for a long time nobody really thought much of it. And then eventually we had people that were like, no, this isn't okay. And we were able to be like, it became a debate among people, and people were like, no, we must keep it, and no, we must get rid of it. And finally, thankfully, we were able to be like, no, like that doesn't lead to human flourishing. If we can agree that human flourishing is a good thing, then we can create a spectrum of morality and start to understand, and then we create concrete rules based off of that. So a concrete rule being slavery is wrong, and we can more or less as objectively as we can say that that's wrong because we've tested it and realized that it is wrong, and it leads to much more human suffering than flourishing. And so, but there are certain things with lies. If like a lie doesn't really affect anybody negatively, I wouldn't say that it's as much moral or immoral as it is just putting something bad into the world. So if you view the world, which is more of a Buddhist idea, as we are more of a collective and we're kind of fighting for each other, I guess, when you put something out into the world that is negative, what goes around comes around. And so it's like when you start lying to people, a very basic example that I could prove it to you real quick is if you start lying to people and anybody catches on for any reason, because, if you are taking not the side of reality, reality's going to win,
Yeah.
And so eventually in some way that's going to catch up to you, and you're going to be the guy who lies, and you're going to have a bad reputation for that reason. So it's a very basic way of saying you put negative things out into the world, and negative things come back from the world. And
I think in some instances it may even be better to lie than to be honest.
right. I mean, it definitely is a gray area, but
Yeah.
I just think, yeah,
It's
see,
hard
that's
to
the thing.
even-
That's the
it's
thing.
hard
It's
to
just
even-
crazy to me that anybody's like morality is objective.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Sam Harris believes that, and I agree with his idea of
I think
the
his
spectrum.
ideas are cool that it can be as objective as possible.
Yeah,
but the
but at
idea
the
of
same
anything
time,
being
it's
objective is hard to make an argument
Yeah,
for, I
because
think.
it's like we can all agree that, the worst possible misery for everything or in everyone is bad, but why is it bad? That's the question.
Well, that's a problem because not everybody can agree on that. Because probably most rational people can agree on that.
Yeah.
But there are people there are psychopaths and sociopaths who don't see the world the same way we do.
Very true.
And so it's easy to say everyone can agree on that. And it's like, well, most people can probably agree on that.
Very true.
But there are definitely people that see the world differently. And so then you go, oh, okay, so it's not as objective as I thought because it's not obvious to them. And so there's something that we can establish as, if we can agree on the idea of human flourishing being a good thing, then we can say objective for lack of a better word, but it's not truly objective in a sense.
Like in the larger sense.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'll move on to the next question. So yeah, I didn't really even have much of a... Well, because some of these I'm like totally like on your side, so it's hard to ask these questions.
These are kind of tough, man.
What are your thoughts? I know that when I dabbled with leaving Christianity, and at first there was a fear because I had been taught since I was a kid. Part of it was the fear of hell, but I also let go of that fear years before I left Christianity because I just didn't think it made any sense. Like, all of it was based off of a loving God, and supposedly this very loving guy, Jesus, came from that God. And I thought, this idea of hell literally makes no sense. And so I'm thinking, well, hell is portrayed a few different ways in the Bible. And if it's portrayed a few different ways, well, that probably means that it's a metaphor. So I thought maybe the idea was that if you don't get into heaven, then you just cease to exist. Like what I imagine most atheists think of death. That life is just over. I think that that's maybe what hell is. And heaven is your consciousness continuing to go forever. So that it wasn't so much the fear of hell, but it was the fear of ending. It was the fear of just being dead. That kind of was hard to walk away from Christianity for. And then once I did, there was still like some fear of every now and again I'd be like, I'm gonna die, and that's just gonna be it. Like every, all the like first kisses and like the first day of school and like the first time I learned how to play music and fell in love, like all of that is just gonna come to an end and be over forever. And like that was very uncomfortable for me for a while until I started reading about more, I think, Buddhist and Taoist ideas, and I came to more of a peace with it. And I kind of thought, no, I'm like much more comfortable with the idea of death than the idea of heaven. Like I wouldn't want to be around forever. I think that sounds awful.
Especially worshiping some crazy guy too for all eternity.
Well, definitely that doesn't make it sound so appealing, but I mean, it's just kind of like I'm only 20, so I'm having fun and I'm excited about if I live to be 80, that'd be awesome. But I wouldn't want to live to be like 400 years old even, because like I think there's a certain point, and you can tell from certain old people that have just lived for a long time, they're like, I'm ready to go. Like I lived a good life and I had fun and I got to explore, but now it's someone else's turn and I'm cool with that.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like when you get stuck on the idea of heaven, it's like the guy who couldn't let go. It's like the guy who's hanging at the party when we're still cleaning up, and it's like, it's over, man. Like, go home.
Yeah.
So what was your experience with that, like your comfort level of the afterlife, and then / do you have any thoughts on the afterlife or any kind of afterlife?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of agnostic towards it. I don't really know what happens when we die.
You're just open to it.
I'm open to an afterlife. I would probably lean more on the side of not believing that it is, just because there's no evidence, of any kind of afterlife at all.
Right.
And as I said before, my mind generally would require evidence for especially bigger claims
for
like
any
that.
kind of belief.
Right. And so, I would say I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I don't believe in the afterlife.
Mm-hmm. So, kind of jumping into I'll leave that for a little bit later.
Yeah, go for it.
What is your hope for humanity as far as belief? Like what if you were giving some kind of address, I don't know, to some graduating class, like what would your hope be for them, whether they were Christian or Mormon or atheist or agnostic? What is your hope as far as belief?
I would say for people to leave behind dogmatism of any kind and really open their mind to others' ideas and be more accepting of those ideas. And at the same way of being accepting, you should also be challenging those ideas as well and putting them to the test. But I think, dogmatism of any kind is just, it blinds you in a way. It makes your position unable to change.
Right.
And, as human beings, I think when we grow the most is when things tend to change, even though change is uncomfortable. When we get outside our comfort zone and really start challenging ourselves and challenging what we think, I think that's when we grow. So I would say that's, I don't know if that made sense. I guess more open-mindedness in general.
Yeah.
From everybody.
Have you seen the Going Clear, the Scientology documentary?
I don't think so.
Oh, dude, it's really good. But the guy who was making it, he was doing a talking head on it, and he was saying he's never been, I think he said he'd never been religious, but when he started this off, it was more supposed to be an expose on why people commit so hardcore to an idea like this. And he's like, the weird thing about religion is it just creates this kind of crushing certainty that eliminates any possibility of doubt.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is sad, because it's like, that's the definition of,
Dogmatism.
I don't want to be hateful, but that's like the definition of arrogance, because like even, I think it was King Arthur, where they were like, do you ever doubt? And he was like, of course, only a fool never doubts. But yeah, it's the idea of dogma in general is just, it's a dangerous idea to think that anything is objectively correct, considering how subjective our experience is. Okay, so one of our first things we talked about, not in the podcast, but in life, was this Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris debate.
This isn't life?
this is life. But the Jordan Peterson Sam Harris debate, which was like the big like 5-hour one or whatever.
Yeah.
We were talking about it, and it was just funny because I had talked to a lot of people who were really into Jordan Peterson about it before you, and we were all like, yeah, it just feels like Sam Harris like didn't get it. Like he just like wasn't on the same page the whole time. And I think he's a brilliant guy. Like I read a lot of Sam Harris. I use his meditation app.
Me too.
Hey,
It's
man.
pretty nice.
It's good.
It's good.
He's got a very soothing voice.
Oh, for sure.
But in that particular debate, I just felt like he didn't get it. And then I told you that, and you were like, really? Because I felt like Sam Harris was winning that debate. Sam's opinion was religion is a old idea that worked for us for a while, but it's silly and outdated now, and it would just be much better for us to get rid of it, considering the harm that it causes. And Jordan Peterson was trying to talk about, I mean, he came off of doing this whole biblical series, and he was trying to say, like, metaphysically, there's a lot to take from religion, and getting rid of it entirely is kind of like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And so he was saying, I get, as far as I can understand, I have tremendous respect for Jordan Peterson, but I do understand that I think in a way he panders a little bit.
Yeah.
Because he knows that he has a lot of people in the Bible Belt that are listening to him because he is he's arguing against an atheist kind of for the idea of religion. So you've got definitely fundamentalists. And so I do think there's probably part of him, though he's definitely not a fundamentalist, that is scared to say, yeah, there are people that don't use their brains, that are stuck on religion. But I think it's obvious that what he's talking about is that there is greater truth sometimes in like metaphor and like metaphysics for us to understand the truth than we can use in just like basic rationality. Because if I can which I think that's like what art is for, which I could consider. The Bible's like kind of art and like also a lot propaganda because it seems that like a lot of the base stories of the Bible probably existed much longer than the Bible did, and whoever created and put together the Bible, including the Old and New Testament, found all these brilliant stories and kind of put them together in a narrative way and introduced a bunch of dogma in between to stitch it together and to make it seem so objective. And so it's like part artistic beauty and then part like, we should probably throw that out. And so it's kind of hard to argue for in a sense, but
yeah, I see.
I definitely think that there are certain things that are truer than like a history or historical fact. So it's like that's Jordan Peterson's whole argument. It's like maybe it's not true like a historical document, but maybe it's true like numbers are true. Maybe it's true in a very non-tangible way that can be more just metaphysically true and can lead us and help us to like greater understanding of the world.
Yeah.
Which is obviously very new agey sounding.
No, I see. It's just hard to separate like...
Right. But I think Sam Harris is arguing in this very analytical and rational way, and he can't get out of that mindset. And he's like, yeah, but it's crazy to think that a guy died and rose again. It's like, right, Sam, but that's not what we're saying. We're not saying that we believe that happened. We're saying that it's like if I felt like it's like if you're arguing against like the Avengers film, and like if Jordan Peterson was like, hey, I found this really cool metaphor of the Avengers film, and Sam Harris was like, yeah, but like superheroes would really come and do it. It's like, right, no, like we don't think that. Like that's not, and he could be like, yeah, well, some people do. It's like, right, but I'm not arguing for those people. You know what I mean? Like people have bad ideas. That's not what I'm arguing for. That doesn't mean we have to get rid of it entirely. So
I see.
I don't know if that would clear things up. I wonder what your thoughts were on that kind of debate.
Yeah,
or at least your thoughts on the, not to interrupt you, but at least your thoughts on the topic of, is religion something that's outdated and that we should get rid of in a sense?
I think it would depend on how it's being practiced, a lot of it. Because as you say, a lot of it is very heavily dogmatized and, that we already discussed how that's not good. I think the thing with it is that you can find meaning and value in stories and art and music. And so to throw it out entirely, I mean, I would disagree with Sam Harris there. If that's what he's saying, I would disagree with that because I know that a lot of people do find value in those stories, and they don't have to necessarily be a part of that religion either to find that value. So I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Nietzsche had a similar idea to Sam, which was it's funny to say that so simply. Nietzsche and Sam hanging out. But he had a similar idea, which was he'd get rid of religion, and the argument against it was it's got a lot of value. And he's like, right, but so does a lot of modern poetry and a lot of modern music.
Like
and
philosophy
a lot of,
and stuff like
yeah,
that.
like we could just replace it with that, and we don't need the Bible. But I think Jordan Peterson's argument and a few other people's argument is that this is like some really ancient stories. It's kind of like Egyptian stories in a way. Like, I don't know if you saw, I got the Eye of Horus up there from the Egyptian stories.
Yeah.
But that's because it's a brilliant story, and I found like it's so much to learn from that story, but that's something to get into later at a later time. But
Sure.
It's something that came from these ancient people that endured a lot of stuff that would wipe us out pretty quick, that they were able to live through a ton of crap that we couldn't get through, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And they were able to get, I mean, everything we have is a gift from our ancestors, so we were able to get here because of them, and they were the ones who kind of developed these stories. So it seems pretty silly to, in any kind of objective sense, say, well, our poetry's just as good. It's like, really? Like, that's a pretty big claim. Like, our poetry's pretty damn good, but I don't know that it's anywhere near this ancient wisdom.
I think Sam may be arguing too against just the people that do believe without evidence as well, because
Right.
I think that is an inherently
Yeah.
dangerous thing to do.
I've listened to a lot of Christian apologists debating, like Christopher Hitchens and
Yeah, for
stuff
sure.
like that. But sometimes, and I love Christopher Hitchens, I think he's brilliant, but sometimes I feel like the argument gets a little silly because they're arguing whether or not, like, I've just gone so far away from fundamentalism that I find the argument silly. When an atheist is arguing against the fundamentals of Christianity, I'm like, I don't even see the argument. Like, I don't even see what, like, and it's like, I know that sounds insulting to someone who is a fundamentalist, but and obviously this is my opinion, but I truly believe if a fundamentalist was able to look at the facts of their religion, they would see how open it truly is.
Right.
Like, if a Christian were to read Misquoting Jesus, or a Muslim were to take a look back at like how we have the Quran, or like the foundation of it, like, I don't think that would eradicate Muslims or Christians. I think if you read that, I don't think that would make them stop being Christians. I just think that it would wipe out the crushing dogma of, I'm certain this is no matter what the way. But who's to say, maybe they're right. But, oh no, what was I saying? I was really onto something. What was I
That
saying?
happened to me earlier.
Dang it,
I'm
man.
not sure, man.
I feel like I was really onto something.
Yeah.
Just the ancient. I was talking about the debates
Ancient.
and how I thought
Yeah.
fundamentalism just confuses me now. And it's like, I don't think that people who think it are unintelligent, because
No, they're
I don't
definitely
think
not.
I'm that unintelligent, and I was a fundamentalist for a while. I just think,
They're indoctrinated, most of them.
yeah, I
And
think
it's so
they're-
hard to escape
I think that a lot of them just haven't thought about it. Like, that's my theory, obviously, because I disagree.
Right.
So my thought is maybe they just haven't looked into certain things, because the information is like known, but it's just not readily available. Like, I guess Misquoting Jesus was pretty popular, but it came out in like 2005 or 2006.
Yeah. And unless you're
I've
really
never heard about it until like a year ago.
And unless you're really doubting your faith, I mean, you're not going to look to
Right?
challenge
Yeah,
it
that
in
stuff
any
is
way.
kind of, you're like, yeah, why rock the boat? I believe it's true. That's enough for me.
Yeah, it's fine.
What has been the biggest difference in your life since being free from religion? What have you noticed, like, the biggest difference of like your everyday life? Or even just your thoughts about life?
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely more accepting of other people, I would say, because, when I was a Mormon and even while I was a Christian, it's not that I was ever, like, hateful of gays or things like that, but I still did view it as something wrong. And now
Right.
I don't, stuff like that, I don't view that as wrong. I just view that as a preference, and there's no choice in that preference. Like, I didn't choose to be straight. That's just
Right,
how
yeah.
I am, I would say, so being more accepting of other people, just having more joy in life, not feeling like I'm being watched or judged all the time. Like all my actions aren't being kept on
Yeah.
some sheet of, oh, is he good? Has he
Yeah.
been good today? Or that was that put a lot of pressure on me to act a certain way.
Does
And
it make you feel almost more moral in a way?
Yeah.
Because now when you do good things, you know that nobody's watching.
yeah, exactly. Well, I believe that. I don't know for sure.
Right,
So-
but
yeah,
yeah.
for sure. And
Right,
it's-
I misspoke.
No, you're fine. But yeah, I would agree with you that, I do feel that I'm not doing good things to get into heaven.
Right.
I'm doing that because I care about other people,
Right.
And I know that religious people do as well.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also that extra added
Yeah,
motivator.
There is
and
the
it's-
extra thing that makes it kind of disingenuous. It's like if you're
Yeah.
doing this for someone else, like don't even do it because
Yeah.
it doesn't mean anything. Like that was the whole thing. Is that Chris Hitchens said when someone was arguing against him about morality, and he said religion takes away morality. If someone was doing something good, like for someone else selflessly, that's beautiful. But if they're doing it for some kind of reward of an afterlife, it suddenly is not a moral act. It's an exchange.
I'm trying to think maybe how else I guess it's made me more of a free mind, I guess.
Mhm.
And it's made me understand like the nature of like how important evidence really is. Like
Yeah.
I just want my like internal view of reality to match reality as it is as best as possible. Now, of course, there's always going to be flaws and biases, and that's something that we have to constantly work to get over. But I feel like my position now is much more rational and less biased.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me also really appreciate science more and understand more about science and
Yeah.
respect it a lot more. So, yeah,
There's
those are
this
some
weird
things.
bigotry is probably not the right word, but there's this weird hatefulness of science in the religious community.
I know it.
And I feel like now that science is just so irrefutable these days, like because we can test something over and over and over again, and if you can't take our word for it, we could test it again in front of you.
Yeah.
That a lot of I think religious people who are at least kind of up with the times are like backstepping, and they're like, and I'm no like hater of science. I'm no hater of science. It's like, yeah, but like in a way, like
But
you don't really
accept
believe
it, though.
what there's, and it's funny because a lot of people are like, you have no sense of awe, and it's like, are you kidding
Oh
me?
my
Like,
gosh, you have more awe.
read one scientific journal and you'd be like, this is nuts. That
Yeah, I
this is
feel
how
like
the world works.
It's more awe in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's actually based in evidence in like that it's true.
Totally. I mean, I've been studying psychology, and as I learn more and more, I mean, we're all kind of neurotic in our own way.
For sure.
And when I start to read about things that I've recognized in my own life, I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. That makes total sense. That this is what's going on behind it, and it's crazy that we've tested it on other people. It kind of makes you
It's
feel
been
like
proven, yeah.
not alone anymore. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, like this is my connection to everybody else. They experience this too.
Yeah, I know one argument too that a lot of atheists will use, and I actually agree with it, which is, can you find a question in which there was once a scientific answer that is now a religious explanation is better than the scientific explanation? And then this follow-up to that is, can you find, a scientific explanation that has overridden religious explanations of the past? And there's countless examples of that.
Right.
So, I mean, for example, the whole idea of lightning, thunder, we used to attribute that to Zeus.
Right.
And now that we
And
know
now
something,
we have an understanding
now
of
we
why that's
actually
happening.
know what's going on,
Yeah.
so that explanation is no longer needed.
Right.
And so there's just another little tidbit in there.
Another thing, and I edit this podcast, so if you're not interested in answering this, you can tell me, we can move on. But
Yeah.
But I'm curious. I know that you go to a Christian college, as I do as well. We don't go to the same one, but we both go to Christian colleges.
Yeah.
I know that I have to go to chapel every single day. Is that the case for you?
So I actually just got done. We're supposed to do 80 chapel credits, 80 hours of chapel before we graduate.
And that's not every single day.
No, it's every Tuesday.
Oh, that's so much better.
Yeah. But I was going to say, I just spent like 40 hours volunteering at the Grace this past week because I only had 30 chapel credits.
And you can get chapel credits for that?
Yeah. You can get chapel credits for like doing community service and stuff. But.
Oh, okay, cool. But just as the idea of you having to go to chapel in general and not believing and not partaking in that ideology and going to different classes all taught by these Christians, probably a lot of whom are fundamentalists. What is your experience being an atheist, surrounded by Christians in a Christian institution?
I will say it's pretty challenging in general, just because you feel alone and you feel like you can't really be open about that. At least I do. I mean, I could be open about it, but I just feel like that wouldn't end well for me.
Yeah.
So I choose to kind of hide that, and that's... I don't really enjoy hiding parts of myself. I'm generally a pretty genuine dude.
You feel like, I mean, Christians are supposed to be the accepting ones, and I'm not to say like all these Christians are hateful, but I mean, it definitely is hard when you're in an institution that's kind of built around this, and everybody is that way. I mean, it's hard to feel like you're not like shitting on the party in a way, to be like, hey, I don't believe any of this.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, I guess I'll just keep that to myself.
I will say though, there was this one guy in my Spanish class yesterday who we were talking about different religions, but with the Spanish inflection or whatever. I can't remember exactly what it was, but she was saying like, we're all Christians. We could be Baptist, we could be Methodist or whatever, with her accent and everything. And so this kid, and I'm not saying anything bad about him all, but he's disabled, so he's in a wheelchair and everything, and he's not all there mentally. But what he did, he's like, he kind of waited a little bit after she was saying all that, and he just raised his hand. He's like, I think of myself more of an agnostic. And I was just like, wow.
That's pretty bold,
That's really bold. That's crazy. And it was just funny the way the teacher reacted, because I could tell she kind of didn't really know how to react. And she was just like, well... we have room to accept everybody, which I thought was a nice thing to say. I don't.
Right, it's hard. I think I came off a minute ago by sounding like Christians are supposed to be accepting and they aren't, and it's like that's not what I meant by it. I just think,
but a lot of them aren't. That's true.
Well, I mean, a lot of people in general aren't accepting.
True,
and it's just hard when you're in that kind of institution. It's like if we're in a science class and we're all there to learn about science. Obviously, the teacher is there to teach science, and one guy's like, I don't really believe in science. I mean, obviously, I don't try to be a judgmental guy, but I'm going to be like, okay, well, then why are you here? Like it's like you kind of, I think maybe instinctually will have that thought. If someone was like, oh, I actually don't believe in Jesus, they'd be like,
what's wrong with that guy?
Why are you here? Like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
That this is what the school is about, right?
Yeah, and it's crazy because, going into the school, I was still a Mormon, and then
absolutely
to Christian to atheist. So
I hadn't decided whether or not I had actually left Christianity when I applied to the school, and had decided to actually stay to go to the school. So it was a similar thing there. And people were like, I was talking to someone, I was like, I have to go to chapel every day, and I don't like, and it's like, I don't want to be like shitting on their whole thing. Like, it's cool that they do that, but like, it's hard for me because we all have to stand up there, and I don't want to feel like I'm a party pooper sitting down the whole time in a protest of defiance. So I stand up, and I don't really sing along to the words, and when they pray, I don't really believe in that, so I kind of just am standing there like, man, I feel so, like it's like basically the whole school, and I'm like, I feel so isolated right now. And,
exactly.
And one of my friends was like, well, you chose to go there, and I was like, yeah, but ideologies change, like all the time. And so it's just like this crazy idea that, and I mean, it's not their fault. Like my friend was right. I did choose to go there
for sure.
And I stayed to that decision, but it's just like, I don't know. It can definitely be isolating. I've noticed. Is there anything else about being in a Christian school for you?
It's hard to meet women.
Yeah,
I will say that. Yeah, I had several girls where we had like really good connections or encounters or whatever, and later, I tell them about that, and then it's like, oh, deal breaker.
That's seriously.
I'm like,
I know that sucks so bad.
It's the worst.
Because
man.
in my idea, of course, when I was a Christian, I thought that is a deal breaker. But now that now that I feel like I've woken up and I'm not anymore, I'm like, I will date a Christian. Like, I have no problem with Christians.
Same here.
I would marry a Christian. Like, I have no problem with it. But the problem with Christianity in its dogmatism is that, like, I won't name it, but I went to a church a few months ago with a friend of mine, and the whole sermon was based around keeping good company. And it was like, basically the whole time he's implying you can't be around non-Christians. But in the end, he kind of clarified and was like, this is not to say you cannot be friends with non-Christians. I'm not saying that. Just not very close friends with non-Christians. And I was like, dude, what if someone in the audience is married to an atheist or a Mormon or something like,
Oh my
and you are
gosh.
putting unneeded tension, this wedge in their relationship that they don't need, based off of all this like speculation that you're assuming is objective, and you could be legitimately ruining relationships right now. And they're like, I'm sorry, I just feel like I shouldn't be around you that much because of this reason, because of this random reason that I've decided is fact. And my cult meeting that I attended, they said that we can't hang out with people who don't believe that we're going to be in charge of our own planet.
It's bad. It's really bad.
No, it's just like, you can believe that, and that's cool, and I don't want to like crap on that if that's what you believe. Like, I've believed some not to say that what you believe is crazy, but I've believed some out there things, and it makes sense. Like, we literally know so little about anything.
Everything. Yeah.
Like, 90% of the known universe is dark matter, which just means like this substance that we don't understand
don't
at
have
all.
any idea what it is.
And so to think that we know anything is bonkers. So obviously all there really is kind of theories about stuff, and we can kind of put some evidence behind theories, but at the end of the day, it's always just a theory, and so
Yeah.
we don't really know.
And that's one of the beautiful things that I was going to say about science, not to interrupt or anything.
Mhm. No, keep going.
It doesn't really claim necessarily to be like hard factual.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's more of like, here are the best models and descriptions that we've been able to come up with to describe like physical properties of the universe. But
Yeah.
it doesn't necessarily claim to actually be fact, even though there are some theories that have just been tested, you know, beyond a reasonable doubt,
Right.
that it's not unreasonable to think it's a fact.
Right. The problem is a lot of Christians will say evolution is just a theory. And it's like,
But-
yeah, but it's not a theory like you think it's a theory. It's not a
There's a
theory like
difference.
some guy went, I think this is what happened. It's a scientific theory, which means it
Big
does have
difference.
evidence behind it.
Big difference.
Not enough evidence to make it a fact. It's not a fact, but it's somewhere in between a thought and a fact, because it has evidence behind it for itself. So it's
Right.
it's like
It's the best current model we have of
right.
the
It's
biodiversity.
like
of
the idea that
universe.
there's no such thing as anything that's objective. It's like it's a well backed up theory by
Very-
a lot of
yeah.
stuff. So when people just dismiss it by calling it a theory, it's like
And
you don't really understand what's
it's kind
going
of
on
a
here.
failure of language a little bit, because the word theory as we use it colloquially is much different than as you were explaining the word like theory in a science sense.
Yeah, scientific
It's
theory. Yeah.
definitely a huge difference.
Yeah, that's something that has, because I can come up with a theory about the
Like
world
right now, yeah.
that we were planted here by ginormous apes that
Yeah.
sprinkled the earth
Fairy
together.
dust.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
and that's a theory, but it
Yeah.
has no evidence behind it, so it's
For
not
sure.
a scientific theory. No, but I have and so that does annoy me about, like, I would be perfectly comfortable being with someone who did believe really anything, because it's all personal, and I can't, literally, my ideas of the universe change a lot. So
That's not a bad thing, though.
it would, well, right, absolutely, but because I'm constantly learning more things, and so I think it would be nuts for me to expect some significant other to be on this crazy fast train with me all the time.
Yeah.
Like, every time I change my theory, it's like, you're with me on that, right? Like, that's a crazy thing to expect of another person.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if somebody believes something different, that's cool. But it's just when suddenly it's like ingrained in you that you can't, like, anything that is differing from you is bad company. It's like, oof, that's a dangerous thought.
It
and it's
is.
going to
Very,
ruin
very.
a lot of relationships. It reminds me of the idea of in Scientology, when somebody like is an enemy of the church or they leave the church, people who are members have to disconnect from them. Where like
Same
people,
thing in
yeah,
Mormonism, man.
dude, at the end of the freaking Scientology documentary, they were talking about like some parents had left Scientology because they realized it was bullshit. And they were talking about, they're literally crying and talking about how their kids had to disconnect from them and they haven't talked to their kids in years. I'm like, this is freaking nuts,
It's
man.
wild,
like,
bro.
that's not okay. And like, of course, it's a caricature of what Christianity does. There's no such thing as like disconnection.
You're right.
And
They
in
call
the
it
sa- in the science-
excommunication in the
Is it a similar thing? Like you can't have any contact with someone who doesn't believe exactly? Or
I
is
don't
an
think
enemy
it's
of the church?
quite that extreme in Mormonism. Although, I mean, it will still happen. It just doesn't have a name.
Because Scientology is a bit like the mafia in that way. It's like you're
they're
cutting them off,
they're
like no more.
crazy, man.
But yeah, it's a similar idea. They're like it's bad. It's suddenly now that they're not a Christian, they're a bad company. It's like, oh, goodness, man. So it does feel that way. I'm like, yeah, it's definitely gonna be hard to get a date in this sense.
It's so tough, man.
I was talking to a friend of mine's roommate the other day, and I just met her. Like literally, as soon as I met her, she's like, "Hi, this is my name," and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Jackson," and like one of the first things she said was, "I love Jesus. Do you love Jesus?" And immediately I'm like, oh, okay, this is gonna happen right now, I guess. Nice to meet you. I was like, in a way. And I tried to explain. I was like, I really like the idea of him, like the archetype. Like, I think that's great, but I don't like, I went into the whole thing, and I was like, I'm sorry. I guess you might not want to hear this. And she was, to give her credit, like she was really sweet, and like I totally don't think that she's unintelligent or that she meant that in any negative way. But that's just kind of the spirit of a lot of Christianity right now, is that it's something that it's not a personal thing. It's something to be shared with everybody all the time.
Right.
And it's like, that's a pretty personal thing. But she didn't know that. That's something that like the people around her do all the time and like talk fondly of. And so I don't hate on her for any reason of doing that, but it is definitely like, man, that's really personal to immediately be like, "Hi, this is my name. What are your beliefs on the universe and how, like, what's the meaning of life? Nice to meet you."
Yeah, it's like, whoa.
I'm like, oh my God, I don't know. And people it's funny because people get so uncomfortable with even saying you don't know, because atheism, it's not its own set of beliefs. Like all atheism is just not theism. That's what the word means.
Yeah, you're just not convinced that God exists.
And I've had people say like, not believing something is still believing something. I'm like, no, not really.
Yeah.
Like it's not believing anything specific. It's just like,
I believe other things.
Yeah, maybe I have some ideas about how the universe got here, but I don't really know, and I don't claim any specific beliefs on it.
Yeah.
Like you're the one claiming it. So if they're like, prove to me that atheism is true, it's like that doesn't even make sense to say that.
It's weird.
There's no is atheism true, because atheism makes no claims besides the non-belief in a god.
Yeah. And I mean, there's different kinds of atheists, of course. You have the Gnostic atheists who say, it's more of, I believe there is no God.
Like 100%. There's no
and
way.
And it's more of like, it's more of a sure position. My position is of more of the agnostic atheist. Right. Like, because, agnosticism and Gnosticism, those are claims of knowledge, whereas theism versus atheism is a claim to belief. So for me, it's more like, I don't know for sure.
Right.
Because nothing's been demonstrated either way. Like, God has not been proven, and he's also not been proven false. So it's like, it's still kind of an open question, but just given the lack of evidence, that's where the atheism comes in. I can't accept, my mind won't allow me to accept things that don't have evidence.
Right. I think the general population has a poor definition of agnosticism.
Yeah.
Because they think they put agnosticism and atheism on the same level as religion, and it's like we're not talking about the same thing.
It's the absence of a belief.
Right, because atheism is about what you believe, and agnosticism is about what you know.
Or what you can know, yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, Bart Ehrman would say he's an atheist because if you asked him, do you believe in a personal God that you can pray to that does all this stuff, he'd say, no, I don't believe that, so I'm an atheist.
But
I don't
not claiming to know that.
So I'm an agnostic.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it makes perfect sense to say I'm an agnostic Christian. So it's like, yeah, I believe in all this stuff, but I don't know.
Yeah,
so I'm an agnostic. And so it's I would think in our definition of agnosticism, which it seems like the general population understands as, and how I used to understand, as just like a non-committing atheist. It's like, I'm kind of an atheist, but I don't really want to say I'm an atheist. Just in case there is an afterlife, and I can be like, see, guys, it says agnostic, so can I like have my eternal bliss now? So it makes perfect sense that I think the intelligent position, and this sounds like I'm asserting my own opinion because I am, but I think the intelligent position is to be an agnostic in anything you are. Like if you were a Muslim or a Buddhist or whatever, to also have the claim that I don't know.
I don't know that for
because,
sure. Yeah.
I mean, Socrates was claimed the wisest man ever because he knew the full extent to which he didn't know anything. He was aware of like, oh yeah, there's no way to even know anything.
Yeah.
And through that, he was able to come to wisdom, but then he was, put on trial for poisoning children's minds. Is there anything about religion and your experience with religion or your experience with freedom from religion, negative or positive in either scenario, that you feel like we didn't get to, that you think might be important to? Because you're kind of speaking for the atheist in this conversation.
Yeah. Well, I would say one interesting thing, just to add, it's not even like a huge thing, but just the idea of, most religious people know what it's like to be an atheist, actually. Because if you think about it, the Christian knows exactly what the atheist position is like when it comes to the Hindu gods.
Yeah, because they just have to think of another religion and be like, that's crazy that you would ever think that.
In a way, like, we're all in some form an atheist, because not everybody believes, in every god. So I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, some of us...
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, some of us just, go one god further, I guess.
Right.
But
hey, that's a good way to put it. So I'll just throw you a pretty softball question.
Sure.
What do you think the meaning of life is? I was kidding when I said softball.
Well, I don't know if there is like an inherent meaning to like the universe or to life. I think meaning is something that we intentionally can design and find and create for ourselves and explore. And I'm still figuring that out for myself. I don't know what my meaning is, for existing. I know that, I want to speak through my music and do things like that, of course. But I don't really necessarily believe that there's an overarching, entangling meaning that we all have, or that's been, as a lot of, religious people would say, the meaning is kind of superimposed meaning. Like, this is your meaning. Your meaning is to worship me and to follow my commands or whatever. So I think that, kind of going back to the last question, that's one of the good things about, being free from religion, is that you don't have any superimposed meaning on what you should do with your life. It's more free to whatever meaning you want to find or want to create.
It's good to know that we're in this place in history, because, a few hundred years ago, if anybody saw this podcast, we'd be
dead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty, it is a very true statement to say, luckily we have the freedom from religion now.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't believe in objectivism really, maybe at all. But as far as the meaning of life goes, I definitely don't have an answer.
Yeah, it's hard to answer that one.
Right. I haven't even decided if it's something that is inherent to life or if it's something that we all make for ourselves. I think, obviously, we definitely can make one for ourselves.
Right.
But I'm of the thought that maybe there is one that is better for all of us than all of these random meanings that maybe we get caught up on.
Yeah. No, I think I kind of agree with you on that.
I just haven't found that one.
It's hard. Yeah.
But I just think that there's something, and this is my more metaphysical, romantic side coming out. But I think it's something that, like, all the songs they're singing about and all the poetry is like, wailing about. It's just that there's something that we can all connect to in story and in music, and so there's some kind of common denominator that humanity in general has in common that I think applies to the meaning, which is possibly just, if we are all one consciousness secretly, maybe it's just the advancing of that consciousness and the adding to the collective. The whole point of my fake metaphor. Brought to you by Ellie Cornett, who has not been on the podcast, but should, to talk about her artwork. Dude, so is your music available anywhere?
So I have a really old EP that's kind of garbage, but I'll throw it out there anyways.
Okay.
It's called Ascent into Space. I did it like 4 or 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. No, wait, 4 years ago. Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, it's still good, but I mean, I would appreciate you checking it out for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
but-
And we can find it on like Spotify and everything.
yeah,
Okay.
Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes. Yeah,
Yeah.
for
Okay.
sure.
Cool. Well, all right. This was fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, bro.
It was good talking to you.
Yeah, for sure.